Hello, you're watching Impact with me, Tim Willcox. Escalating tensions in the Taiwan Strait as Beijing warns the US over an expected visit shortly by Nancy Pelosi to Taiwan. The US deploys 4 warships. China flies military jets close to the unofficial border. Well, this is the scene live at Songshan International Airport. Now, that's right in the centre of Taipei, where we believe Nancy Pelosi will be landing probably in the next 10 minutes. In other news, the leader of Al-Qaeda, Ayman al-Zawahiri, has been killed by an American drone strike in Kabul. That is all coming up here on Impact. Welcome back to the programme. Nancy Pelosi, the third highest-ranking US official, is due to land in Taiwan at any minute. Tensions are high. China, which claims Taiwan as its own territory, has flown warplanes close to the island ahead of her controversial visit. 4 US warships have also been deployed to the region. Well, these are the live pictures we've got coming in from the Reuters news agency of Songshan International Airport. Now, there are 2 airports close to Taipei. This one is right in the centre, and it's our understanding, and indeed a lot of the international media's understanding, that Nancy Pelosi will be arriving here, not the other one, about an hour's drive away from the centre of Taipei. We're told that she should be landing within the next 7 or 8 minutes. The 82-year-old's visit, though, extremely controversial. China has warned the United States that the US would pay the price if she does land in Taiwan, which of course China believes to be part of mainland China. Our Asia Pacific editor, Celia Hatton, looks ahead.
Nancy Pelosi, the third-ranking US official, all smiles in Malaysia. But behind the scenes, the apparent next stop on her Asian tour to Taiwan is so risky that it's shrouded in secrecy. Ms. Pelosi's team hasn't confirmed she's even visiting the self-ruled island, but that hasn't stopped China from issuing stark warnings.
We have repeatedly and unmistakably expressed to the US our strong opposition to Speaker Pelosi's potential visit to Taiwan, and we hope that US officials will be very clear about the importance and sensitivity of this issue and how dangerous it could be.
Tensions over Taiwan date back to 1949, when the Communist Revolution forced the then ruling party, the KMT, to flee to the nearby island of Taiwan. Over the decades, Taiwan's built itself into a self-ruled democracy, but Beijing still considers Taiwan to be its own. China's leader, Xi Jinping, has put the reunification of Taiwan and mainland China at the top of his agenda, pledging that it's part of China's great rejuvenation. In Taiwan, many are welcoming a potential visit from Nancy Pelosi. They say it makes them feel less isolated. But on the island, they're still left to consider how they'd defend themselves if China really invaded. Preparation drills are becoming a way of life.
Because of the war in Ukraine, we have to be more prepared. To put it bluntly, we are quite scared, because there's no way of knowing if the war will also come here.
Taiwan, it's thought, is an island caught between 2 rival superpowers. Even without a visit from Nancy Pelosi, the need for such shelters isn't going away. Celia Hatton, BBC News.
As we understand it, Nancy Pelosi is due to arrive in the next 5 minutes. We'll return to Taipei for that. It's difficult to say precisely because the flight tracker that 600,000 plus people have been watching has crashed again. But according to initial information we had a few minutes ago, she is due to land imminently. Before she does, let's just catch up with some of the day's other main news. Indians living in remote villages in the Himalayas are facing a water crisis. Glacial streams are shrinking. It's hard to fetch water in freezing temperatures. The government is now using special methods to try and bring tap water to the these villages. For her latest report on India's water problems, the BBC's Divya Arya travelled to Ladakh to see how successful these methods really are.
13,700 feet above sea level. It's a desert over a mountain. Lamo has lived here all her life and never had tap water.
I keep water for drinking here and for washing utensils here.
She and her husband take me on their daily trek to fetch water. We climb over many lower streams to reach the cleanest source.
Temperatures fall so low that water freezes when left outside. So we fill only as much as we need. If we need 20 litres, we fill 20 litres.
So Lamo has to make daily trips in biting winter. Even that does not suffice.
Traditionally, these glacial springs had enough water to service the drinking water needs of this entire region. But over the decades, as the Himalayan ice has receded, these springs have also shrunk, and this region has had to move its dependence to underground water.
Deep digging is underway. To deliver on the government's promise of providing tap water, pipes and tanks must be safe from freezing.
Ladakh is not like plains where there are overhead tanks from where water is distributed to homes in the village. Here, tanks are built underground to prevent water from freezing.
After a year of preparation, water supply is being tested in the village today.
Hello. Hello.
Aya.
Most of the special thermal coated taps remain dry. The local engineer explains that a pipe burst causing leakage. While Lamo waits, this tanker is the solution. If only they could get tap water. Divya Arya, BBC News, Ladakh.
Now to the US state of Kentucky, where at least 37 people have died, hundreds are still missing in flash flooding. At least 6 children are among the dead, including 4 siblings aged between 2 and 8 who were reportedly swept from their parents' arms. More rain is forecast. Well, to Pakistan now, where an army helicopter carrying 6 officials has gone missing during flood relief efforts there in the southwest of the country. Flash flooding triggered by monsoon rains have killed 140 more people in the country over the past week. Officials say these deaths take the overall death toll from rain-related incidents since June to just under 500. Local officials say victims are not receiving any food or water. I've been speaking to our reporter Pumsa Firlani, who is in Islamabad.
Well, what we know from this latest development around the helicopter is that the army has confirmed that the helicopter has crashed, killing all 6 people who were in there. They say that they believe that this was due to the horrid weather conditions experienced in that part of the country, and this is what led to low visibility conditions and eventually the plane crash. Now, we know that from local weather experts, more rain is expected during the course of the week, and there have been warnings that this will severely hamper rescue and search operations that are set to be underway in that region to try and get some people who've been isolated from their communities and outside help to places where they can receive food and even clean drinking water. It's been a slow, painstaking process because most of the infrastructure in rural parts of Pakistan was scant to begin with, and much of it now has been destroyed by the continuing rains.
Yeah, and the long-term or short to medium to long-term consequences of this must be huge in terms of housing, businesses and road and power infrastructure, as you're saying.
Oh, certainly. They are far-reaching. We are talking about thousands of people just on a human aspect level thousands upon thousands of people whose homes have been destroyed, some who depended on their livestock for livelihood, who've had livestock completely decimated by these floods, who will have to start from the very beginning. You also mentioned that businesses have been affected, so this will also have an economic impact in a country that is also currently under severe socio-economic strain. So the impact will be far-reaching, and there are also concerns, though, that with the extreme weather patterns continuing to change in this region and similar parts of the world, that something like this will be happening again in the near future, and many communities, particularly poorer communities, have no way of protecting themselves against the elements.
Pumza Falani, let's take you back to Taiwan. Now, this was the camera we had actually on Zhongshan International Airport. As you can see, it's now redirected and just looking up into the night sky there, and we think that light you can see descending is Nancy Pelosi's flight, reduced now to what, 2,000 feet, and descending. We've also heard from Chinese media that 2 fighter jets have crossed the Taiwan Strait. Now, China in the last few hours is saying that the United States would pay the price if the Speaker, the 82-year-old Speaker, the first female Speaker of the House of Representatives, and indeed the second Speaker to land in Taiwan since 1997. Now, they said that America would pay the price if she did land. And with our Asia-Pacific editor, Celia Hatton, alongside me now, if this is her plane, Celia, it seems that we're just a few minutes away. The rhetoric has been so febrile, so high over the past 24, 48 hours. What do we make about these Chinese jets crossing the Taiwan Strait?
I mean, this is something that's been floated around for a while, this possibility. You know, some analysts were raising the possibility that China might send planes to fly alongside Nancy Pelosi's plane as it came into Taiwan, simply to illustrate the fact that they could, raising the possibility of some kind of miscalculation, some kind of accident that might take place. Hopefully her plane will land safely, because I think that the possibility of any kind of threat to Ms. Pelosi's safety would really raise the stakes quite high. But that is something. I've also heard, you know, some were saying, well, maybe China will fly planes around Taiwanese airspace, again, simply to show that they can.
Well, at the moment, it seems that there is just one plane coming into land. I think she is with other congressional leaders as well. Now, just in terms of the timing of this, we were speaking a little earlier, and you were saying the rhetoric has always been pretty fiery about Taiwan, especially under Xi Jinping's premiership. But do you get the sense that things are reaching a point now where some very serious diplomacy needs to take place to try and draw the sting out of this, because these threats are getting louder and louder?
You know, a lot of voices have been raised lately with concerns that all sides are sort of sleepwalking into a major conflict. You know, for years, everybody was just sort of happy with the status quo, I think. You know, I lived in China for 15 years, and for quite a long time, you know, Taiwan was happy to sort of develop its democracy, develop its economy, and sort of be left alone.
I'm just going to interrupt you. Sorry, Celia. I'm not sure if you can see these pictures, but this is it. The plane carrying Nancy Pelosi, the 82-year-old Speaker of the House of Representatives, despite all the warnings, has now touched down at Zhongshan International Airport in the centre of Taipei. As I said, the first arrival there since Newt Gingrich as Speaker, Republican Speaker, back in 1997, and against all the warnings and threats indeed from China. What do we understand, Celia, is her agenda there now over the next 24 hours?
It's interesting. To be honest, she hasn't said much about what she intends to do, and it'll be very interesting to see the tone of her language when she is in Taiwan, what she promises. I understand there's a bill, possibly $4.5 billion worth of military support up for grabs for Taiwan. If the United States decides to designate Taiwan a key non-NATO U.S. ally, the U.S. has already given $108 million in arms sale to Taiwan already this year. That angered Beijing. And so certainly a lot of military support could be on offer. I think also we'll be interested to see what other kinds of support, whether she extends further diplomatic support, whether she speaks about support for possible Taiwanese independence. That would infuriate Beijing. And so it'll be interesting to hear the language that she uses when she's on the ground.
Just to be clear for perhaps some of our viewers who don't know the history of Taiwan, split away 1949 from the Chinese mainland. Everyone there speaks Mandarin, or mostly do, and will be very conscious, will they, of what is being said on the mainland, because of course they are having daily exercise, or not daily, but frequent military drills, aren't they, in the expectation or in preparation for an attack at some stage.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, things really have been in flux in Taiwan in recent years. You know, as I was saying before, for a long time it was accepted that the status quo, really on all sides, what was really the way to go. That's sort of what China wanted. Wasn't really going to push the Taiwan issue too much. The United States wanted to maintain the status quo, and of course Taiwan. That has really changed on all sides for a variety of reasons. But the Taiwanese people themselves have been adapting to that as well. You know, preparing. You know, bomb shelters have been in place in parts of Taiwan for quite some time. But now we're hearing much more urgent preparations, stories of, for example, hospitals preparing trauma wards and the like.
Just stay here, Celia, because we've just heard had a tweet from the Global Times saying that this aircraft is the USC 40C aircraft, said to be Pelosi's flight to Taiwan. No official confirmation, but it didn't head straight to Taiwan from the South China Sea, but circled around and is approaching Taiwan. It's now landed from the Philippine Sea. Observers said it likely attempts to avoid any possible PLA interception. Barbara, well, we sort of knew she was going to land, didn't we? Barbara Plett-Usher joins us now from Washington. Do we know what the itinerary is now that she's on the ground?
Nothing has been officially mentioned since her flight itself and her visit itself wasn't confirmed. We expect that she'll probably retire for the night quite soon after arriving, and that most of her engagements will take place on Wednesday morning. It is expected that she will meet with the president as well as some legislators. We have reports, unconfirmed, that she is also going to be meeting with activists who are critical of Chinese human rights. So these are some of the details that have been coming through, but none of her itinerary has been confirmed, as I said, because, of course, the trip itself wasn't confirmed.
I mean, it's very early. I mean, she's only just landed, but presumably no reaction yet from the White House.
No, there hasn't been a reaction yet, but the White House came as close to having a reaction as it could without stating that she was actually taking the trip. So the spokesman for the National Security Council yesterday had quite a lengthy press conference in which he stressed again and again that any possible trip by Ms. Pelosi would not be a change in policy, that China would be overreacting if it followed on with its threats, that a Speaker of the House had visited Taiwan before, so this was not unprecedented, and so on. Basically saying there's no reason to think that U.S. policy has changed, even if the most powerful Democrat in Congress visits. It's a fear here that in the administration that the Chinese are not quite getting that, because Nancy Pelosi is a Democrat, the president is a Democrat, the separation of powers whereby Congress is independent to do what it wants separate from the presidency, and Mr. Biden doesn't have the authority to tell her not to go. All of these things which we've been hearing endlessly for the past couple of weeks.
Yeah, I suppose
the concern is that the Chinese don't actually pick that up.
And it raises the question, doesn't it, for a lot of people, just wondering about the timing of this, Barbara, because there have been so many warnings about how provocative this would be.
Yes, well, Nancy Pelosi was planning to visit Taiwan in April, and then she had to postpone because she got COVID. So it's been on the books for a while, or at least for part of this year. And now the trip has gone ahead. In that period, tensions have been high between China and the United States anyway. Relations are low, but during the period of months that have followed since April, I think the administration has assessed that the risk of tensions will increase even more because they're thinking about the party congress that Xi Jinping is holding in November, where he wants to get to cement his third term in office, and in the run-up to that period would need to show that he was, might have to feel that he would have a demonstration of strength rather than a weakness, which a high-level visit by a U.S. politician to Taiwan might suggest. That's been the kind of calculation here, and she will have heard that. But she's a long-time critic of Beijing. There's a lot of support for this in Congress, this idea of showing solidarity with Taiwan as a democracy. And she hasn't said anything herself about the timeline, but there are midterm elections coming up in November, in which the Democrats might lose the House, and then she would no longer be Speaker. So it's possible that factors into the timeline. But she has been duly warned about the risks, if not a sort of military response to her actual visit, although we are seeing demonstrations of Chinese military power, then along the road that the escalation might continue to percolate and cause China to become even more assertive than it has been, and make relations with China more difficult than they have been.
Yeah, Barbara, stay with us if you would, please. We're just seeing some pictures now of people coming off this plane. It's so dark that we can't actually make anyone out. But as I said, Nancy Pelosi is there with a delegation. And Celia Hatton, our Asia Pacific editor, still in the studio alongside me. We talk about the spirit of Taiwan. We talk about it's a democracy and everything else. What sort of presence is there of mainland China, reflecting mainland China's position in Taiwan, if any at all?
Oh, that's a really good question. I mean, I think there are lots of people in the Taiwanese opposition who really espouse to have closer ties with Beijing. They say, look, we should really pay attention to geography and to history on this. And really, China is such an easy trading ally for us. Why don't we forge closer ties with China economically, get some political assurances? And they don't really see closer ties with Beijing as being a terrible thing. Now, I think the majority of people in Taiwan, especially younger people, are opposed to that idea. They are much more in favour
Celia, here is, sorry to interrupt, here she is coming down the steps, 82-year-old Nancy Pelosi walking down the steps, first Speaker of the House of Representatives to land in Taipei since 1997. A few flashbulbs going there as the press have gathered on the tarmac, and Celia Hatton, our Asia Pacific editor, alongside me now. Interesting that I'm not quite sure whether this is being watched live in Taiwan, but certainly this trip was being followed on Weibo, which caused the site to crash, the flight tracking app to crash. And presumably, though, the people watching in China will be furious about this because of the response from Chinese state media.
Absolutely. I mean, it's been interesting to watch Chinese state media cover this. At first, they were relatively quiet, and I wondered whether they were trying to kind of, keep the pressure off a little bit, hoping in a sense that maybe Nancy Pelosi wouldn't make the trip, and therefore they didn't have to kick up a fuss too much. But that certainly has changed in recent times. We've been seeing opinion editorials in Chinese newspapers threatening that the United States will pay a price and so on, sort of echoing the line of the government. This has also been very carefully followed in Taiwan itself, although some people have said, if it hadn't been leaked in advance that she was coming, maybe we wouldn't have been so interested. It's been fascinating to see how this has been covered, but I think at this point, if it's a very short visit, it'll be interesting to see how long it drags on in the media on both sides of the Taiwan Strait.
But Taiwan's sense of vulnerability and precariousness, being so close to the mainland, obviously shared by regional neighbours as well.
Interesting. I mean, one thing I've heard increasingly is this idea that Taiwan is edging towards the so-called porcupine defence, that it's going to arm itself so heavily that it will become untouchable by China. And it's thought by some that this is just a matter of time between when Taiwan is able to acquire enough arms that it's really an unpalatable option for Beijing to invade. And so the question is really, does Xi Jinping try to invade now if he wants to, because it's possible, still possible in theory, or does he put it off because he's got other concerns on his plate? And so that porcupine defence is really on the lips of many people.
Celia, stay with us. I'm going to just ask another question of Barbara Plett-Usher whilst Matthew Amroliwala takes over for Global and just replaces me, so you'll hear his voice in a moment. But Barbara, just explaining the one China policy and strategic ambiguity, is that shifting subtly, if not officially, do you think, within the White House?
Well, the White House certainly officially has stressed again and again in recent days that the one China policy is not shifting. Now, this, of course, is the policy that both China and the United States say they follow, although they have different versions of what it means. For China, it means that China and Taiwan are the same country and Beijing is the only government. For the United States, it means it recognizes that there's only one government, Beijing, but it does not take a position on the status of the two sides. It says that that should be settled peacefully. It has informal relations with Taiwan, but it also is required by U.S. law to make sure that Taiwan is able to defend itself, so it sells weapons, defensive weapons to Taiwan. Whether the needle is shifting on that is something that the Americans have said is not the case, but there is reason to question that because the president, Joe Biden, in the past year has 3 times pushed the envelope on a doctrine called strategic ambiguity, which is that the Americans never quite say exactly how they would respond if the Chinese were to invade or use force against Taiwan. And he has now 3 times said that the U.S. is obligated to defend Taiwan. That's not exactly what the agreement says. The agreement says that the U.S. is obligated to help to make sure that Taiwan has weapons to defend itself. So the question is whether he's making that statement by accident, whether he's signaling a change in position. I don't think that this administration would be rolling out a new policy in that way, in that sort of ad hoc way. And every time Mr. Biden has said that, the White House has walked it back.
Barbara, thanks very much. More from you in a moment or two as we continue to watch these pictures live being played out from Taiwan, the first moments of Nancy Pelosi's visit. Celia, as you watch these pictures, what do you make of what we've just witnessed?
It's just a historic moment, isn't it? This was something that was played out 25 years ago when Newt Gingrich, the then House Speaker, visited Taiwan. But that was a different era. China was much poorer, much weaker in relation to the United States. Things have changed immeasurably since then. Also, Newt Gingrich was a member of the Republican Party. In the White House at the time was Bill Clinton, a Democrat. And so the Clinton administration at the time could conceivably argue that they hadn't put Newt Gingrich up to this visit. And so really things have changed. Nancy Pelosi is a very different character from Newt Gingrich. Newt Gingrich spent 3 days in Beijing meeting with officials before traveling on to Taipei. What a friend, I think, safe to say, of the Chinese leadership. She's been a consistent critic for decades now. So really that's the concern, that it's not just that it's a visit by the House Speaker. It is a visit by a top-ranking Democrat. She is a visit by Nancy Pelosi herself, who in Chinese slang is referred to as the old witch or the American old lady. They like to refer to her as in derogatory sense. So this is just a different era, a different person from a different political party.
Celia Hatton, thanks for taking us through that analysis as we watched those pictures of Nancy Pelosi arriving there in Taiwan at the start of that visit, that breaking news that the US House Speaker arriving there very late at night, and you can see just the dark pictures, but there she comes down the steps, Nancy Pelosi starting that visit, as Celia was saying, the first US House Speaker since Newt Gingrich to arrive there in Taiwan, despite all of those warnings we have had from China in recent days. Let us continue with coverage with Barbara Plett-Usher, our correspondent in Washington, and Steve McDonnell waiting to talk to us from Beijing. But first, let us start in Washington. So despite everything we've heard in recent days, the trip is happening and it started.
Yes, that's right. Nancy Pelosi has just touched down after days, if not weeks, of speculation and rumor about will she, won't she, is she planning to do it, will she go ahead with it? The administration advising her quietly that the risks were high, that this would greatly increase tensions with China, but publicly trying very hard not to state its own preference. Joe Biden coming close by saying the military thought it wasn't a good idea, but then he himself feeling that he couldn't go so far as to tell the Speaker of the House, an independent branch and a co-equal branch of the government, what to do. And in the end, Ms. Pelosi, for her own calculations, decided that she would go ahead with the trip. She has been flying on a military plane, which is standard for these congressional trips, for the security of them and the transport. And so she has now just landed in Taiwan despite threats from the Chinese, concerns and anger from the Chinese, and rhetoric that has been accompanied by warships scrambling to the median line between Taiwan and China, live fire exercises in recent days. So in other words, shows of military strength. And now we await to see what she will do while she's there, what she will say, and how the Chinese will respond.
Well, exactly on that point, let's head to Beijing and Steve McDonnell. Steve, I mentioned there the multiple warnings from the Chinese over recent days. We had that phone call between President Xi and President Biden only last week, but the trip is happening. The dynamic has been changed, and I suppose we're now into an unknown dynamic.
Yeah, well, the interesting thing about the threats coming out of Beijing has been just how much has focused on a military response. The Chinese government has said that the People's Liberation Army won't just sit idly by while Nancy Pelosi visits Taiwan. Now, what constitutes an appropriate action from the military which wouldn't be seen as kind of weak and lame after you've made such threats? Well, around about at the same time that she landed, local media here, China Central Television, the People's Daily, flashed this news that Chinese fighter jets were flying across the Taiwan Strait. Now, maybe they'll fly across the median line, maybe they'll get closer than they otherwise would have. I mean, it could be that over the next 24 hours we're going to see more and more actions like this. I mean, it's interesting, from the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokeswoman, a whole bunch of tweets appeared just as Nancy Pelosi arrived. And I'll give you a small flavour of one of them. So this is from Hua Chunying. The US and Taiwan have made provocations together first, whereas China has been compelled to act in self-defence. Any countermeasures to be taken by China would be justified and a necessary response to the US oblivion to China's repeated démarches and the US's unscrupulous behaviour. So yet more warnings that there'll be some sort of military response from China. We'll just have to see, well, as I say, what happens over the next 24 hours.
You talk about the tweets. Let me tell you, just in the last few seconds, news from Nancy Pelosi, quotes from her saying our discussions with Taiwan's leadership will focus on reaffirming our support for our partner and on promoting our shared interests, including advancing a free and open Indo-Pacific region. She goes on to say the visit is in no way contradicting long-standing United States policy. But Steve, Beijing sees it exactly the opposite to that.
No, they see this as something of a red line. Now, I know there have been visits in the past from speakers, but it's a long time ago. Xi Jinping is now in power here, and the administration here has really been talking up its intention to one day grab Taiwan back, even using military force if it's necessary. And to have such a senior figure from the US arrive in Taiwan, well, they see it as a bit of a slap in the face. However, I mean, what was Nancy Pelosi going to do? Once China starts making threats, it's going to be hard for her to back down as well. I mean, the danger with all of this posturing from Beijing and Washington and threats going back and forth and all this military hardware in the region being assembled is that somehow or other there'll be an accidental flash, an accidental mishap, miscommunication, and it could lead to, well, actual fighting between the world's two superpowers.
Steve, thanks very much. Let's go back to Barbara in Washington. Barbara, your assessment of why this has flared up now and over the last few weeks?
Well, Nancy Pelosi had been planning to visit Taiwan already in spring and wasn't able to because of COVID. And then when the rumors started that she was planning to go again and that the administration felt that this wasn't a good timing because of Chinese domestic politics. They're very aware that there's going to be a party congress, an important party congress in November, that Xi Jinping is gearing towards it. He wants to use it to confirm an unprecedented third term. They were concerned that a senior, the most senior Democrat in Congress landing in Taiwan at this time would provoke him and cause him to respond in a way that he might not have otherwise. Although, as Steve was explaining, it's always a controversial issue. And then I think he was right. When the Chinese started to react as they did, even if Ms. Pelosi had wanted to back out, which is not at all necessarily the case. She has a strong history of standing up to China on human rights issues. But even if she had wanted to, it would have begun to look like appeasement here. And she was starting to get quite vocal support from others in Congress, including Republicans, who feel the same way about Taiwan as she does.
Barbara Plett-Usher there in Washington, Steve McDonnell in Beijing. Thanks for taking us through the immediate snapshot reaction as the visit there from Nancy Pelosi starts in Taiwan. Let's continue the conversation. Let's talk to Daniel Russell, who served as the top US diplomat for Asia under former President Barack Obama. Thanks for joining us here on BBC News. Is this visit right or reckless, do you think?
Well, look, national security is all about risk management, and I would say that Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan right now is an unnecessary risk. It's a lot like a feel-good gesture for the speaker, for many in Taiwan, but it's kind of a sugar high that is likely to be followed by a crash. It doesn't really serve a strategic purpose, because what Taiwan needs from the United States isn't sympathy and symbolism. It needs real defense capabilities. It needs economic support. And it also needs the U.S. to handle its relationship with China prudently, because tensions between Washington and Beijing translate to greater risk to Taiwan.
You talk of a crash. What sort of things potentially do you envisage?
Well, look, you heard from your correspondent, Barbara, that this is a tremendously fraught political moment in China and a low point in the bilateral relationship. Remember, dictators have politics too, and Xi Jinping is in the middle of a political struggle that's tremendously sensitive. So the timing is very awkward, and I think that it's virtually guaranteed that the Chinese are going to feel impelled to respond in what the world will see as a vigorous way. Now, we're in a security dilemma in the sense that the Chinese think that they're the aggrieved party, the Americans think that we in Taiwan are the aggrieved party, and each side is taking a step that it believes is justified, but that feels to the other to be escalatory and provocative. So the Chinese have signaled that there will unquestionably be some retaliation, some response through military means. The People's Liberation Army and the PLA. And the PLA is already conducting large-scale exercises, previously scheduled exercises, in the vicinity. We should expect them to ramp that up. I think there will be short-term military and non-military actions. They could recall their ambassador. They could perform economic acts of retaliation against Taiwan, not likely against the United States. They could impose some sanctions on the Speaker of the House, not very meaningful. But in the longer term, I think we could expect to see an even more vigorous strategy of pressure and punishment against Taiwan. I also think that there's a real risk because we were on the cusp of engineering a summit meeting between Biden and Xi Jinping this fall, probably on the margins of the G20 leaders meeting, that could be a casualty of the speaker's visit. And if so, that's a big loss to the relationship, because that personal relationship is one of the few strands really holding things together between Beijing and Washington.
I mentioned that you closely advised Barack Obama. Joe Biden, of course, did not want this visit to go ahead. He said it wasn't the right time, was unable to stop it. But how would you advise Joe Biden? How does he handle this, given that it has gone ahead?
Well, now that it has happened, I think the critical thing is to avoid an unintended incident that could quickly spiral to a crisis and even to conflict, because the crisis suppression mechanisms, the escalation prevention mechanisms that formerly existed between the US and China, that included military to military channels and hotlines, those things are moribund. Those things are largely inactive now. So the risk of an incident or an accident triggering a confrontation that neither Joe Biden nor Xi Jinping wanted is very high right now. So I would expect that the White House is signaling to the Department of Defense that they need to exercise a high degree of caution just to reduce the proximity, reduce the surface area. And I think we've already heard the NSC, the National Security Council spokesperson, begin trying to de-escalate rhetoric as well, so that tempers don't flare to the boiling point.
Yes, you talk about the rhetoric. Worth just repeating what Steve McDonald told us, with China already slamming as extremely dangerous US actions. I just want to put onto our screens a map of the area, because as suddenly we see this new flashpoint in the world. Just explain to our viewers why Taiwan is caught between two superpowers.
Well, look, just the basic diplomatic relationship between the United States and the People's Republic of China was founded on a compromise, on ambiguity about the status and the future of Taiwan. The simple fact is the U.S. does not recognize Taiwan as a nation, and in fact is opposed to Taiwan independence. At the same time, it's a flourishing, vigorous, admirable democratic society that the United States wants to support and preserve. Geographically, it's barely 100 miles off the coast of the People's Republic of China. Mainland China itself has grown tremendously powerful over the recent decades and has a national mission to what they call reunify the country, to reabsorb or absorb Taiwan and make it part of the PRC, just the way they have absorbed Hong Kong. The United States, Japan, most countries in Asia, and I think democracies around the world, understand that not only would this be a huge setback for the cause of democracy and universal law and rights, it would also have huge defense and security implications for the United States and many friends around the world. So maintaining the status quo as unsatisfactory and awkward as the status quo might be, is the least worst option available.
Just a final thought, because you touched on it already. I suppose one of the consequences of this trip is it makes all of those areas that those two capitals, Washington and Beijing, have been grappling with so much more difficult. One thinks of trade, one thinks of the war in Ukraine, one thinks of climate change. All of it presumably becomes tougher given this.
It's already tough. It's certainly going to get scratchier for the foreseeable future. A lot will hinge, I think, on whether the Chinese side overplays their hand, makes mistakes, let alone triggers some sort of incident. As I said, the US and China just don't have the mechanisms for dealing with the kinds of occasional accidents or crises that have happened in the past, but that have been kept in bounds. Today, that could escalate very dramatically. I will say, though, on the other hand, neither the United States nor China wants head-on collision with the other. China, and Xi Jinping in particular, not only is facing a delicate political moment, but has very formidable economic challenges at home. Some of them are driven by COVID-19, others are driven by policy failings. Right now, I think there is a desire in both capitals to try to stabilize the relationship. This puts that desire to a severe test, but with a lot of luck and some deep breaths by both leaders, I hope that they can see their way through this flare-up and find a way to meet in person and talk through some of the areas of discord and the areas of common interest in person at a meeting this fall.
Daniel Russell, former top advisor and diplomat in Asia under President Barack Obama, thanks so much for joining us, giving us that analysis as we watch these pictures from the airport where we've seen Nancy Pelosi arrive in the last half an hour, the start of this historic visit there for her, and a hugely controversial visit, as we've already heard from Beijing. That is our major story here on BBC News. We will continue to return to that for all of the developments as we expect Nancy Pelosi to leave that airport, head for her hotel in the next few minutes. Plenty more on today's Global. Now, let's turn to our other major story here, because the leader of Al-Qaeda has been killed by an American drone strike in the Afghan capital, Kabul. Ayman al-Zahawi was one of the masterminds of the 9/11 attacks on America alongside Osama bin Laden, and was one of America's most wanted terrorists. President Biden said his death would help